Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing an in-depth overview of the grammar section on the Hesi A2 exam. So there really is quite a bit to cover on this, and so I'm just going to run through all of the major things that you should be working on as you prepare for the grammar section of the Hesi A2 exam. So first off, what does the section look like? So the grammar section on the Hesi A2 exam has 50 questions total, and you will have 50 minutes to complete the entire section. So if you break that down in terms of general categories that you're going to see on the grammar section, you're going to have questions that deal with the 8 parts of speech of the English language. You're also going to have quite a bit of questions that focus on grammar and understanding general grammar rules of the English language. So you're going to have some questions that deal with punctuation or capitalization or just rules of grammar. So that's kind of just broad and generally what the section is going to cover. And in just a couple minutes, I'll be breaking down in much more detail some of those different topics to give you more ideas of how to study and how to prepare really well for this section. Now, in terms of study guides and studying for the test, there are a couple courses that really helped me as I prepared for the Hesi A2 exam. And the 2 courses that are my top recommendations are, first of all, the Mometrix online course for the Hesi A2 exam, and secondly, Nurse Hub's online course for the Hesi A2 exam. Both of those courses have great comprehensive courses that can help you get prepared for the test. And not only do they cover the grammar section, but they also cover the other sections like math and anatomy and physiology and all of those other sections that I know you're so excited about taking on the Hesi A2 exam. For me personally, using those courses really helped to cut down my study time. I didn't have very long to prepare for the Hesi A2 exam, and I was able to, in just a couple weeks, get totally prepared, and I was able to score over 90% on my total exam. So those 2 courses I highly recommend. Now there also are some other free resources online that are extremely helpful, and I will link some of those below. So first of all, there are some free practice tests that can help you to see where you're at when it comes to grammar, and it can just give you a nice preview of what the test is going to be like, what the grammar section is going to be like, and can help you see where are some areas that you might need a little extra work in. If there are specific grammar topics that you know you need extra work in, a resource that has been super helpful for me is Khan Academy. I've used that a lot for math, and also they have a lot of grammar resources as well. You can just set up an account, it's free, and then you can look up those specific topics that you need help in. They also have a lot of science topics as well. So without further ado, let's just jump right into all of these wonderful details of the grammar section of the Hesi A2 exam. I'm going to give you a rundown of all of these topics, and I will be putting down below timestamps for each of these. So if there's a specific topic you want to hear about, you can just go down below and click on that. And if you're studying for the Hesi A2 right now, I'd love to hear about when you're going to be taking the exam, and you can just pop a comment down below real quick. I'd love to hear from you and hear when you're going to be taking the exam and what are some study areas that you have been focusing on or that have been tricky for you recently. So first, let's talk about the parts of speech of the English language. So there are 8 different parts of speech in the English language, and we're just going to do a very quick overview of all of these 8 parts of speech. If you need more in-depth information, definitely go and do a little bit more research on anything that you have questions on. And today I have my notes here in front of me on my computer, as you can see. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm looking at, just to make sure that I'm not forgetting any of the information that I want to share with you all today. So first of all, let's talk about nouns. Now, what are nouns? Nouns are words that tell us about people, places, things, or ideas that are not pronouns. So there's 2 different types of nouns. There's common nouns, and then there's proper nouns. Common nouns are things that are not specific people, places, things, or ideas. Proper nouns are the ones that are about specific people, places, things, or ideas. And those proper nouns will be capitalized, while common nouns will not be capitalized. So for example, a common noun would be man, as in like the man is walking down the street. Now, if you said Bob is walking down the street, then Bob would be a proper noun that's talking about a specific man. Next part of speech that we'll talk about is verbs. Verbs are words that show action or a state of being. So they're going to be the part of the sentence that talk about what is happening. So for example, if you say, I am taking the Hesi on Monday, I is the pronoun, and then am taking is the verb, because that is the action of the whole sentence. With verbs, there's two very important things to understand. There are forms of verbs and there are tenses of verbs. All English verbs have 5 forms. So there's the base, the past tense, the past participle, the present participle, and the third person singular. So for example, with the verb laugh, the base would be laugh, the past tense would be laughed, the past participle would be laughed, the present participle would be laughing, and then the third person singular would be laughs. So that is the form of the verb. And again, in English, all verbs have 5 different forms of a verb. The ways that these forms are actually constructed are going to change depending on whether a verb is regular or irregular. If the verb is regular, it will always follow a specific rule for how each of those forms is constructed. If it's an irregular verb, it will have its own rules for how each of those forms is constructed. All right, so that covers the forms of verbs. Now, verbs also have what is called tense. Tense talks about the time that the action is taking place. So whether it's happening in the past, the present, or the future. So for example, the present would be like, I take my test. Past, the verb would change to took, as in I took my test, and then future would be I will take my test. And then in addition to those simple tenses, there also are a few additions that you can also make to the tenses. So there's the simple tense, which is what I just gave you an example of. Then there's the perfect tense, the continuous tense, and the perfect continuous tense. Now, it's most important for you to understand the simple tense, but if you have time to do a little bit more studying, then you can also do a little bit more studying on the different types of tenses. That sounds funny to say that. All right, so now moving on from nouns, we're going to talk about adjectives. What is an adjective? An adjective is a word or phrase that modifies or describes a noun. So for example, the fat cat. Cat is the noun in that little phrase, and then fat modifies cat, and the modifies cat. So both of those describe cat. So just remember with an adjective that it's usually a descriptive word that is going to be connected to a person, place, thing, or idea in a sentence. So now let's talk about adverbs. What is an adverb? An adverb is a word or a phrase that modifies or describes a verb or an adverb or an adjective in a sentence. And usually an adverb is going to describe something in a sentence or give you a little bit more detail that talks about when, why, or how, or where something is happening. So for example, if you said, he whispered quietly in the library, so he would be the subject or the pronoun in the sentence, and then whispered is the verb because that's the action that's happening. And then quietly is an adverb that is modifying the way that he whispered. All right, so prepositions. What is a preposition? A preposition is a word that is governing a noun or pronoun and it's showing a relationship to something. Usually a preposition also happens before a noun or a pronoun. So for example, she drove in the car. The word in is a preposition, and then in the car is the whole prepositional phrase. And there's a whole list of prepositions that if you have a chance, you could just work on memorizing what common prepositions are, because then you'll learn to very, very easily identify them in a sentence and know where they are. All right, so conjunctions. Conjunctions are connecting words that connect clauses or phrases. The words and, but, if, yet, all of those words are conjunctions. There's other ones as well, and they are connecting words. Now, interjections. What is an interjection? An interjection is a word or a phrase that is spoken to express feeling or to demand something. So if you exclaim, wow, or oh my goodness, or whatever, those are interjections. All right, so I'm going to finish up talking about pronouns. There's a little bit more here also with pronouns. So a pronoun is a word that can take the place of a noun. So it's a word that can take the place of a person, place, thing, or idea. And pronouns are used as a way to refer back to someone or something that you've already talked about, and you can use a pronoun to take the place of the actual noun. So for example, I, you, it, he, she, we, they are the subject pronouns, and then me, you, it, him, her, us, them are the object pronouns. Subject pronouns are the ones that are going to be performing the action in a sentence, and then object pronouns or objective pronouns will be receiving the action in a sentence. Then on top of that, there's several different types of pronouns that are good to understand, but especially for the Hesi A2, it's also good to understand reflexive pronouns and relative pronouns. So reflexive pronouns are pronouns that are used to refer back to the subject in the sentence. So some examples are myself, yourself, himself, herself, themselves, oneself, ourselves, yourselves. Now, one thing to take note of is that there is no such word as their selves. That's a common grammatical mistake that can happen on the test. It's themselves, not their selves. Now, possessive pronouns are pronouns that are used to show possession. So for example, hers, his, yours, mine. Those are all possessive pronouns, and it's showing that somebody owns something. It belongs to them. So one last thing about pronouns on the Hesi A2, and I saw so many questions about this, so this is really important to understand. You want to know the proper use of when to use I versus me in a sentence. Now, first of all, here's grammatically what you need to know. So I is the subject pronoun. Me is an object pronoun. Now, the reason that's important to know is because you need to know if you're using I as the subject pronoun, that needs to be the person, I mean, it's you, but like that needs to be the person who's performing the action in the sentence. It has to do with performing an action. Me is receiving the action because it's an objective pronoun. A really nifty way to check and see whether it's correct to use I or me in a sentence is to use this trick. Jenny and I are taking the Hesi exam on Monday. So when there's a pair like that, take the other word out of the sentence and leave just the pronoun. So now say, I am taking the Hesi exam on Monday. That's correct, right? Because I am the one that's performing the action. So yes, that is correct. I is the subject, so that is the correct word to use there. Now here's another example. The proctor set up the exam for Jenny and me. All right, let's check and see if me is the correct word or if we should use I in that sentence. So now take out the word Jenny again, and let's say the sentence again. The proctor set up the exam for me. All right, so that is correct. It would not be Jenny and I in that scenario. It would be Jenny and me, because me is receiving the action. The proctor is doing it for you. And then when you take out Jenny, you also can kind of hear that that is the correct way to say the sentence. So just remember, when you have pairs like that, and then you have the option of using I or me, take out the other part of the pair, leave just the pronoun, and test out the sentence with the pronoun. And usually just by hearing it, if you know English pretty well, you'll be able to tell. And then the second test is to check whether the pronoun is doing the action, that would be the subject pronoun, or receiving the action, that would be the object pronoun. Okay, one more thing related to pronouns. So there's something called the pronoun antecedent. That's just kind of a fancy way of talking about the noun that a pronoun is referring to. So on the Hesi exam, you're going to get questions where you have to determine whether the pronoun that is being used matches the noun that is being used in the sentence. So this is why it's really important to understand about nouns and to understand about the different types of pronouns and how they function in a sentence. Because when you're choosing what is the correct pronoun, you need to make sure that the pronoun matches the noun in person, number, and gender. So that is why it's so important to understand these things. So I would say, in terms of probably the most important parts of speech to study for the Hesi A2, it would be nouns, pronouns, and verbs, most importantly, and then the rest of the parts of speech are also going to be tested as well, but really heavily on the nouns, pronouns, and verb and correct grammatical usage of those parts of speech. All right, so now on to some of the common grammatical errors that are going to be tested and that a lot of times people have issues with on the Hesi A2. So first of all, let's talk about capitalization. Now this is something that in terms of when you're on, when you're texting with your friends or when you're on Facebook or Instagram or on social media in general, capitalization is not a big deal. And, sometimes you're going to put things in all caps or sometimes you're going to be in no caps. So this is something that can be really tricky for people to know what is really proper grammatically. So let's talk about a few of these things. So first of all sentences are going to begin with a capital letter. All proper nouns where you're talking about a specific person, place, thing, or idea is going to be capitalized. Titles that are referring to people, so like Mr., Mrs., Doctor, etc., those things are also going to be capitalized as well. Now, here's where sometimes it can get a little bit tricky. So if you are talking about, let's use the word mom, for example. So if you're talking about your mom in a general sense, you would not capitalize it. So if you say, my mom is coming for dinner tonight, you would not capitalize mom. But if you say, I asked mom to come for dinner, then mom would be capitalized because you're using that to refer to her specifically. And so you would capitalize that. All right, so another grammatical thing that's good to kind of brush up on and know is punctuation. Okay, so that may seem really basic and easy, but especially knowing where commas should go in a sentence and knowing where periods should go, those are a big deal. And on the Hesi A2, when I was taking it, there were a lot of examples that I was given where there would be a run-on sentence, which is just where more than one sentence is put together and it doesn't have a period where it should have a period, or it doesn't have a comma where it should have a comma. And those are the grammatical errors that you need to learn how to identify, and then you can get the correct answer on the exam. So that's really important to understand. 3 punctuation marks that you should really study up on and understand is understand the comma, where commas should go, where they're appropriate, how to use commas. Secondly, apostrophes, know how to use apostrophes. That's super important. I also had a lot of questions on that. So if there's an apostrophe that's showing possession, you're going to use it differently if you're talking about one thing that possesses something rather than 2 or more things. So just for example, let's say you have one dog and you say, I lost my dog's leash. Dogs would be D-O-G apostrophe S because it's just one dog. So it's the singular dog with an apostrophe S. Now let's say you have multiple dogs and you say, I lost my dog's leashes, okay? So you're referring to multiple dogs and multiple leashes. So it would be dogs, plural, and then you put the apostrophe at the end. So D-O-G-S apostrophe and then leashes. So hopefully that makes sense, but definitely look into that and understand how apostrophes work. And another common mistake is to know the difference between apostrophes that show possession versus just a noun that is plural, because this is a really common mistake. So like if you say, I love my babies, it would just be plural babies. It would not be baby apostrophe S because you're not talking about the baby possessing anything. You're just saying, I love my multiple babies, right? But if you say, I love my baby's hair, you're talking about one baby and you're talking about the hair that your baby possesses, and so you would do baby apostrophe S. I know some of these examples are weird, but they're just popping into my head, so I'm using them. All right, so finally, very important punctuation to understand is quotation marks. So quotation marks are what you use when somebody is talking, and you'll want to make sure you know when to begin that and when to end that and how. So at the end of a quotation mark, for example, know how to put the period or the comma and then the quotation mark after it, and make sure that when someone is talking that quotation marks are being used and that they're not missing. Okay, we're getting there, you guys, hang in there. So sentence fragments and complete sentences. Okay, this is extremely important on the Hesi A2 grammar section. I saw many questions that had to do with this. So what is a sentence fragment? A sentence fragment is a part of a sentence that is not complete. It's not a full sentence. It doesn't have both a subject and a predicate. Now, what is a subject and a predicate? a subject shows who or what is performing the action in a sentence. So usually that'll be a noun or a pronoun. And then what is a predicate? The predicate is the action of a sentence. So usually that's going to be the verb or a verb phrase, and it can have, other words that modify it, but there's going to be one verb that is specifically doing the action. If a sentence is missing either a subject or a predicate, it's missing a critical part of the sentence and it's not complete. So that sentence would not be considered complete. Now, sometimes what can be a little tricky is when you see a clause that is called a dependent clause. So, for example, as he slept. Now, that little clause does have a noun or a pronoun, he, and then slept, verb, but the word as makes it dependent, which means it needs to rely on another independent clause to actually work as a full sentence. So as he slept is not a full sentence because there needs to be more description to make it a complete sentence. While I'm on that topic, make sure you understand the difference between dependent clause and independent clause. Look that up and study up on that. Also understand the active verb tense versus the passive verb tense. So look that up also, study up on that as well. All right, so finally, you guys, we're going to talk about word pairs that can be very confusing and that are commonly tested on the Hesi A2 exam. So I'm just going to do a quick run through of these commonly confused words. So first of all, know the difference between your. I know they sound the same, but they're different. And there, and it's. Okay, these ones are fun, right? Basically, you want to understand which ones are the conjunctions and which ones are not. The conjunctions are two words that are put together. So your, when it's a possessive word, is just Y-O-U-R, like, I like your house. It belongs to you, your. Now, if I said, you're coming over to my house tomorrow, that would be not possessive your, but you are. So a helpful way to know whether it's your, Y-O-U-R, or your, Y-O-U apostrophe R-E, is to break out the two words separately and see if that works in the sentence. So if I said, I like your house, think to yourself, would it make sense to say, I like your house? No, obviously not. So then you already know that's not what it is, it's the Y-O-U-R. Commonly confused words. Affect with an A versus effect with an E. So look those up, understand how to use them. Another one, among versus between. Among is used when you're describing a relationship that has to do with more than two things, and between would be when you're describing a relationship that is just two things. So the words amount versus number. So amount is referring to things that cannot be counted, whereas number is referring to things that can be counted. Okay, so for example, you could say, the amount of snow that dumped last night was incredible. Okay, you can't count the snow, so you would say amount. Now, you could say, the number of times that he jumped rope was impressive. Now, you could count the amount of times that he jumped rope, so you would use the word number. Important one, understand good versus well. All right, good is an adjective describing a person, place, thing, or idea. Well is almost always going to be used as an adverb. So it's going to be modifying a verb or an adjective or another adverb. So think about it this way. So the good is modifying the noun, and well is usually going to be modifying the verb. So you would say, for example, I am doing well, because well modifies am. But then if you say, I had a good day, it would be good, not well, because good is modifying day, which is a noun. Another one is then with an E, T-H-E-N, versus than, T-H-A-N. So then has multiple definitions, like next, also, in addition, therefore. It's most often used as an adverb, but it can be used as an adjective or a noun at times. For example, then he walked down the road. Then, comma, he walked down the road. So that would be used T-H-E-N. But than is specifically a conjunction, and it is going to be used just to compare things. So if you are comparing something, more likely than not, you'll be using than, T-H-A-N, and then is going to be an adverb. Also understand how to use which versus that. So that is going to be used usually to introduce a restrictive clause, and a restrictive clause is something that is specifically identifying something in the sentence. So for example, you could say, I am taking the Hesi exam in the building that is next to the student center on campus. So that word that is describing the building that you're taking the test in, right? So that is a restrictive clause, okay? So it's needed to identify something in the sentence. In that sense, so it is integral to the sentence, and you do not need to put a comma before the that. Make sense? So I am taking the Hesi exam in the building that is next to the student center on campus. Okay, so that is very integral. It is a restrictive clause. It's integral to the sentence. Now, as another example, if we were saying which is a word that is used in non-restrictive or non-defining clauses. So these are clauses that are used to add additional information into a sentence, but it's not necessary to the message of the sentence. So for example, you could say, my Hesi A2 study book, which has a lot of helpful information, is sitting on my table. All right, so the integral part of the sentence is saying, my Hesi A2 study book is sitting on the table. But then I added the non-restrictive clause. So in that case, you would use commas. You would say, my Hesi A2 study book, comma, which has a lot of helpful information, comma, is sitting on the table. So the difference between that is that is used in clauses that are restrictive or defining to the sentence, and which is used in clauses that are not defining and not necessary to the sentence. And you do use a comma when you're using which. All right, guys, super quick here. I'm just going to run through this. You want to know how to use lay versus lie, less versus fewer, harder versus hardest, and so on. You want to know how to use the ending and est when you are comparing two things or more. So like, I worked harder than her, or I worked the hardest of all. So look up that, understand how to do that. I touched on this before, but this is very important. Know the difference between its, as in its, and its, it apostrophe s, which is two words put together with an apostrophe, which is it is. So its, without the apostrophe, is a possessive that it is talking about the dog lost its leash. It's is possessive and it's talking about the leash. You do not use the apostrophe there. But then if you say it's raining outside, if you split that up and say it is raining outside, that makes sense. And so that is the case that you would use it apostrophe s. All right, I hope that was helpful for you guys today. Let me know in the comments down below what was most helpful for you and what you are studying hardest for as you're preparing for the Hesi A2 exam. If you enjoyed this video, you can go ahead and smash the like button down below, and you can also subscribe to my channel for a lot more content on preparing for your nursing entrance exams, and especially for your T's and Hesi exams, and doing your best on your nursing prerequisites.